I'm really interested in, and I'm going to talk a bit about online communities here. I've been a part of some online communities on Facebook, on Instagram, mostly on Instagram, that are these essentially non-professional archivists. Some of them do have an archivist background, like an academic background or a librarian background, but a lot of these people are self-taught and they are collecting ephemera from different eras. You have people who are doing everything from like 50s and 60s ephemera, 70s, and on and on. But the particular groups that I was interested are focused on Y2K culture. And they do everything from collecting and photographing and uploading and documenting shopping bags from stores like Limited Too and The Gap and Abercrombie and Fitch to stills from music videos and providing information about who directed the music video, who did the costume design. Like I learned all about this incredible costume designer, June Ambrose, who worked on a lot of very futuristic looking videos in the late 90s, early 2000s. And, they provide this information. They do scans from magazines, which are, or from catalogs. I mean, catalogs often, because they're thrown out, they're often not preserved in, say, academic libraries. So having these people who are just collecting catalog, like the Target catalog from 2000, which I write about, having that was just such a valuable resource for my book. But I think, basically, I'm sorry, so I completely forgot the question.
No, 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 you're touching on it. So, I mean, as you
Oh,
were,
what's interesting? Yeah, so what's interesting? Yeah, so I was just immersing myself in this ephemera, and so like there are certain things that just I like nostalgia. I've always been interested in nostalgia and history and what historians call material culture, which is just like the stuff that we use and buy and interact with every day. And um, I've always liked shopping and fashion. So the stuff that was really hitting the nostalgia button for me when I was part of these communities, which I still am, like I still interact with people in these communities. It was stuff like butterfly hair clips, um, frosted eyeshadow, like in silver and light purple and light blue, low rise jeans, futuristic products like the the iMac that was clear. It was translucent plastic with different colors that you could buy. The Volkswagen New Beetle, which, by the way, it was one of the colors was cyber green because between the years 1993 and about 2002, a lot of consumer aesthetics, whether that was fashion for teens or high fashion, or products like the New Beetle, like the iMac. This was influenced by this futuristic look where everything was very sleek and edgeless. You had a lot of molded plastic, a lot of chrome and silver. I write about this inflatable chair that I had that I begged my mom to buy me from Target because it was in the Target 2000 fall catalog. And I just I just thought that that stuff was really interesting, and it really, just looking at it, hits a strong emotional chord, not just for me, but for a lot of people in my generation. And that was evident from hanging out in these communities where people were just going on and on about like this picture of a chair from a catalog that cost $20. Um, and I just thought that that was something that I really wanted to look at and examine. Like, why are these objects bringing back such strong memories for me and for others? What do they mean? What can we learn about the history and the society at that time by looking at these objects? I spoke with the architecture critic, Kate Wagner, who's also a friend of mine, and she said that it's sort of like the McMansion to financial crisis thing is a little overstated. That wasn't the causal mechanism, but it's more that in the kind of collective consciousness, McMansions represent the values that led to the financial crisis. So it's more like a symbolic thing, which, by the way, is like, I'm very interested in kind of it's almost a kind of psychoanalysis. And again, I'm making this sound really academic. Like, this book's a humor book. Like, it's marketed as comedy writing. It's meant to make you laugh as well as, experience other emotions. But yeah, like I'm interested in what yeah, what are these things. And I watched a lot of MTV, and I was watching all these rap videos. I was watching Jay-Z, I was watching the Hot Boys, I was watching Nelly. And this was just like, this constituted my middle school and high school experience of the world, and shaped it in a lot of ways. And I wanted to explore that. And I actually think that that's a kind of underexplored aspect of Y2K culture. And it was so ubiquitous because what had happened was hip hop really became central to pop music from the late 90s in a way that it really hadn't been. Like, it was really its own genre with its own marketing apparatuses. And you really started to get much more crossover airplay, as well as, pop stars and rappers collaborating and so on, Mariah Carey and Jay-Z and so on. And in that era. But I think the thing that always stuck with me, that I always wanted to explore, was the way that this, not just rap and hip hop, but this particular type of hip hop that was almost a caricature, where you have the throwing of money and naked women in bikinis and thongs. You have Nelly swiping a credit card in uh, in a woman's butt on Tip Drill outside of McMansion, by the way. And the way that this was received by a certain type of white person always fascinated me. That was very interesting to me. And I include myself, or at least myself as a teenager there. Um, and I just thought about it for years and years, like 20 years, like, what is going on here? And I do make clear in the book, I'm not just talking about any white person. I think that there's a specific type of white person, thinking like a frat boy, right? Let's say a Republican frat boy who has, conservative beliefs, often explicitly racist beliefs, but who loves Jay-Z and, loves Lil Wayne. Like, what's going on here? And I I really did some psychoanalysis here. And in my view, and again, I include myself here, at least at the time, in my view, engaging with this music was a kind of projection to say, hey, all of these problems that were happening just below the surface during the Y2K era, despite this general sense of prosperity, you had seriously rising inequality. You had seriously growing mass incarceration. I mean, this was when, mass incarceration was really at its peak. You had just this horrible, just this horrible system that was happening. And this was a way for a certain type of white person to say, hey, these problems in our society, well, they're actually the fault of the people who are the victims of those problems, and it's also a way of saying, like, hey, I'm really comfortable over here. I'm different I'm different from Manny Fresh. I'm not like him. I'm different from Jay-Z. I've never had to sell drugs, even if I have done it, to my boys in my frat house, or I've consumed many drugs, you know. And I guess I just sort of I wanted to just explore what's going on here and why this was so popular among a particular segment of white people and how it was received. And so I think one of the things that also stuck with me was, like, when I was in high school, there were a group of these sort of like frat boy type guys who had a fake rap group, where they used a racial slur in their names, and they did this performance that was, um, when I look back at it now, it almost feels like a minstrel show type of performance where it's like almost making fun of the norms of bling era rap. But they're not the only ones doing it. You have this throughout um, American society. Like, I found a Washington Post article about a dance party in Williamsburg that was like a hip hop dance party, which, fine, great, except the flyer had a bucket of fried chicken as the advertisement, saying, hey, it's essentially saying, hey, white hipsters in newly gentrified Williamsburg, come on down and almost like participate in this minstrel show or cosplay. You had people at that, or I think that same event, in per the Washington Post article from 2006, showing up in blackface. So I think it really gives lie to this idea that it's just about fandom. And I very much think anyone can be a fan of anything. It's not, there's no problem with being a fan, but that's not fandom to me. That's something else. The essay is called Larry Summers Caused My Eating Disorder. And I was always really dissatisfied with the way that, having experienced disordered eating, I was always very dissatisfied with the way it was talked about. It was always talked about exclusively like, well, these dumb girls are just reading too many fashion magazines and they're thinking they have to go on a crash diet. But that's not, as if eating disorders were these, feminine or rational behaviors. And that really bugged me, because the way I saw it was a completely eating disorders were and are a completely rational reaction to a society of increasing inequality, where women are, your literal worth. There are actual studies that show thinner women earn more. And there's even a Wall Street Journal article about women right now with GLP-1s who are in their careers, who have successful careers, who are going on GLP-1s to improve their careers so that they can be thin. So this is a rational reaction to a, what I would call, like in historians' terms, political economy, that really ratcheted up in the Y2K era, caused at the top by people like Larry Summers and his policies, that increased inequality, decreased job security. And so people, especially women, although now eating disorders among men are now going way up, as well. But these are rational reactions to this extreme instability caused by policies at the top. It's not this feminine or rational thing of, well, gee, if I just put down the fashion magazines and stop being such a silly girl, I wouldn't have anorexia or bulimia, And so I really, really wanted to state that in public, because I wanted to set the record straight. And I wanted to also, it pissed me off, I like to write things that I wish existed. And I wish this essay had existed, especially at the time when I was struggling with all this stuff. It might have helped me clarify some things. And so I write about that. But the other thing I write about is the modeling industry and the economics of that. And so I write about how there are actually statistics about how, after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, um, the percentage of models from the former Soviet Union went way, way, way up. It was like, I believe it was a majority of working fashion models. Um, and you also had these very high profile models like Sasha Pivavrova. I talk about Natalia Vadianova, who was a Vogue cover girl who had this, and again, as a fashion and photography fan, this beautiful editorial that still, I mean, it's very, very beautiful, reenacting different scenes from Alice in Wonderland, wearing these different couture blue dresses of different styles. And she's photographed, they did it at, I believe it was in Versailles, at a garden in Versailles. It's just this stunning editorial, but she's very, very thin. And I had always wondered, I was like, why are all the, I was really into reading these fashion magazines, especially as a teenager. And I was always wondering, I was like, why are these models, why do they all have Russian names? What's going on here? And so I looked into it as an adult, because part of this book was about solving these kind of long-standing questions, right? Like, why do the frat boys at my school pretend to be rappers? Why are all the models Russian? Why are silver inflatable chairs so popular right now? And so it's going back with the skills and insight of someone who has some training and sort of an adult's perspective and the perspective of time passing to be able to try to look for some answers to these questions. And so what I found was that so Larry Summers was one of the quote unquote Harvard boys. There's a late 90s article in The Nation about this, as well as many other articles. They were these Harvard trained and affiliated economists and policymakers who went into Russia to theoretically help the government, but what effectively happened was just like a massive sell-off of what was, formerly government owned stuff to private asset holders. And so that's how you get like the Russian oligarchs. And so you get from these policies, you get extreme inequality. You get at one point 200% inflation in the course of like a year. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, people talk about inflation here, which is a problem, but can you imagine if, a candy bar that cost $1 was $200 next year? I mean, that's not the basis for a stable society. And so you had also, there's a Lancet study that talks about how it's, I believe, to the point, it was like the largest peacetime drop in life expectancy due to these policies. So you had the complete collapse and looting of a society with the help of these highly respected American policymakers. And like, so what happened is you had these women who would go on the modeling market, as well as, and I don't really write about this, but also the sex industry, to support their families. And so they're kind of coerced. It's not like they're just doing this because they just love the art and the beauty of modeling and the fashion industry. They're doing it because they have to help their families support sick relatives or pay for food. And the fact that it's, I don't know, just those two things together seemed really, really important to talk about and kind of weave into a coherent narrative. And again, I also think like often things that are coded as female are seen as not important. I'm not sure why like a car, which might be coded as male, that's a more important piece of kind of cultural criticism than something like a fashion magazine, but it's sexism basically. But I wanted to really explore these things that shaped my life, and not just my life, but those of many, many, many other people, mostly women in my age cohort. It's really important to mention, just to remind everyone or tell people who don't know, YouTube didn't come about until 2005. And it wasn't even for a few years after that that you really got to be able to watch any video, any music video you wanted on command. The other thing too was that also with music, you had in like 99 2000 you had Napster disrupting the CD industry, which was then at its peak, and very lucrative for artists. But still, it wasn't, you didn't have Spotify. That didn't really come until the 2010s. I believe 2012. I might be wrong about that. But if you wanted to listen to a song or let alone watch a music video, you had to wait for that to be broadcast to you by MTV or VH1, or if you wanted to hear a song, you had to either buy the CD or hear it on the radio. You couldn't just have what you wanted whenever you wanted. And so if you wanted to see Nelly's song Ride With Me, you would have to watch MTV for it, which, I mean, it was playing practically once an hour, so that wasn't too much of a problem. But it would be, it'd be on MTV, but also it would be on TRL. And TRL was this show where kids would use the internet to, and adults would use the internet to vote on essentially like which top 40 music video they liked the best. And so there was a sense of participatory democracy. There was a sense of surprise because each day you were like, well, oh, I voted for Rollin' by Limp Bizkit. Is that going to stay at number one, or is it going to go down the charts? Or, oh, is All I Want Is You by Christina Aguilera, is that going to go up the charts? And so there was a really fun participatory element. And it really was the kind of last appointment TV, in that, this was just right before everything split up because of social media and the internet and streaming, in particular. And so, and it was, TRL was, I believe it was on at 3 in each time zone, which was the perfect time for kids getting home from school. It was designed so that you'd get home from school and then you'd turn it on and watch it and maybe talk with your friends on AIM about who was up, who was down. You'd call in, or, use the internet to vote for your videos that you liked. And it really was this, like, it was like pop culture central for my generation of people who were born I was born in 1988, so it was like people born from like mid to late 80s through very early 90s. I open each essay with a memory of either a music video or an object. Like, I have an essay on like sexual mores and porn, and sexuality. And I open that with talking about Ludacris's video for What's Your Fantasy? Because that was, that came out when I was 12. And this was the exact time when, I was going through puberty, and me and all my friends were talking about like, oh, have you heard about, this or that, in terms of, sex or whatever. And this song, which is fairly sexually explicit and talks about like a lot of different stuff in that in that realm, was a real talking point for people in not just my middle school, but like a lot of people I've talked to who were in middle school at that time. And so I open each. What I did was I was like, well, I want to write about sex and sexuality. What's the best entry point? That video and song and the lyrics, and talking about, trying to decipher the lyrics with my friends, and, trying to figure out what does that mean? I talk about my inflatable chair in the essay about Y2K aesthetics, which is like what I was talking about earlier, where everything is very futuristic and silver. I talk about, the one that doesn't open really with something about pop culture is my essay about the dot-com bubble, although I do talk a lot about pop culture later. That I open with a memory of being on a plane to visit my aunt and uncle in San Francisco, which we would do almost every year, because they live there. And my uncle was involved in the dot-com bubble, and he worked in Silicon Valley. And I talk a lot about how the dot-com bubble, it shaped my own life path, but it also shaped my views at the time and now about history in the world, and how kind of cavalier it all is, how so it's about how all these people, my uncle included, got, overnight rich in the dot-com bubble, and then that burst 2 years later. And so most of that went away. And I think um, that experience kind of taught me that we're all at the mercy of history, and like you might think you're in charge, but you're kind of not.